Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson. And today we're joined by Dr. Emily Kiberd, chiropractor, mama of two, and creator of Thyroid Strong, which is a workout program designed specifically for women with Hashimoto's. We're talking about why your workout approach might be all wrong, whether it's gentle or intense, and how it's essential to feed our muscles using resistance training in order to support healing and get the results we desire without the overload. Better results with less output. Dr. Kiberd, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
I am so excited to dig into this topic because from personal experience as well as clinical experience, I know how important it is. And we were talking before I hit record as to, that it's such an important topic, yet so few are talking about it. And you have this amazing perspective and lens. But I'd love to start with story, because I'm guessing that you weren't dreaming of creating Thyroid Strong when you were a little girl. So how did you get to be doing this?
Yeah. So I've been a chiropractor for 14 years, since 2007. And had a baby in 2015, and I had all these symptoms that you would kind of put under this umbrella of you're a new mom symptoms: extreme fatigue, losing my hair, outer third of my eyebrow, couldn't lose the baby weight, couldn't finish my sentence, right? That brain fog. And I just thought, okay, this is my new norm. Like my mom friends, my patients, my colleagues are like, you're a new mom. Of course you're tired and you can't finish your sentence. Your baby's probably not sleeping and you're getting up a bunch of times a night. 18 months postpartum, same symptoms. And I was like, this cannot be how I live my life. This is like, I run a clinic in New York City. I run a team, my new baby, I can't be present with, like, I didn't feel like I could connect. And so I started to kind of, walk down that path that a lot of us walk down: conventional, primary care, endocrinologist, 2 functional medicine docs, and wasn't ever really given a clear diagnosis. And one of my girlfriends said, hey, why don't you go meet my friend, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon? And so I met Gabrielle. She took a bunch of blood work. She's a functional medicine doc. And she's like, you have an autoimmune condition. You have elevated thyroid antibodies. Has no one tested that or told you this? I was like, no. And I had brought her past lab work. And she's like, oh, everyone's only tested TSH. And my TSH was like, okay, it was like 2.8 to 3. It wasn't, off the charts, but it was elevated. And I had all the symptoms, right? The 2 biggest struggles for women with Hashimoto's, which is what I was diagnosed with, was difficulty losing weight and that extreme fatigue, like fatigue worse than first trimester pregnancy fatigue. And so we just started to take those steps to clean up how I was eating, some environmental factors, mold, parasites, heavy metals, some adrenal insufficiency, burning the candle at both ends. And about 9 months later, I started to feel better, And I know a lot of women would think that's a long time. But for me, I thought I will do whatever it takes. Just give me a game plan. I'll execute. So you tell me no gluten, no dairy, a low histamine approach to eating. And so, the one piece that I kind of waited to clean up was the exercise piece. I was trying to really lose the baby weight with a lot of cardio. So I'd go to a spin class, or I'd do 2 spin classes back to back. I'd do like a spin class and then I'd walk across the street and do a HIIT class. And so I was like, the weight wasn't coming off. And I was also extremely tired for days after one workout.
Inflamed. Yes.
And inflamed. Yes. Like I just felt like boggy all over. Yeah. I know that's not an official medical term. And so I had a trainer working in my clinic. He's amazing. He was a trainer for 22 years, Matt Semrick, still a trainer. And he's like, you know what? You sound like you are expending so much energy. And why don't we just make it really, really simple? And he put me on a kettlebell resistance training program, 3 days a week, 20 minutes. And my joints didn't hurt. My muscles didn't ache. I felt better. And the weight started to come off. I was like, he's like, let's do this smarter. Like, what you're doing sounds exhausting. And, I have a background in kettlebell training. And, a lot of people ask, well, why didn't you tap into that? And I think, that cultural narrative of like, do cardio, lose weight has just been so ingrained. I used to do triathlons and marathons and half marathons, and I kind of just defaulted to that. So I started to do that, felt way better, lost more weight by doing less. And I was co-treating patients with functional medicine doctors. So they were in New York City looking, at the body from the inside. And they were sending those patients to me to build their muscle mass, get them strong, and address the joint pain and muscle aches. And that was really the birth of Thyroid Strong, was working with those women, playing with what worked on me and finding, okay, what am I repeating over and over again that just more women need to hear and can learn in a very simple way.
Amazing. I love that. And we go to our default, right? If you were a runner and a triathlete, that's what you're going to go to. Yeah. It's like, we may know, calories in, calories out isn't really the thing, but that's still, we have certain defaults. And again, I love that then you were like, wow, there's a need for this. Like, it's not just you. We could spend an hour just talking about commiserating about, because I'm sure most listeners with thyroid issues had that similar experience of, TSH, and, just really glad that you finally got your answers. And if you're listening and you're like, oh, I tick those boxes, but I've been told for years my thyroid's fine. Like, make sure you're getting a full thyroid panel, including, all the antibodies, free T3, all the goodies.
All the things. I mean, I think the especially important piece to that story is my Hashimoto's went into remission, luckily, because it was caught early before there was too much destruction of my thyroid gland. Was I on thyroid medication for a little bit, for maybe 3 to 6 months? Yes. But, probably 18 months after starting from getting diagnosed to starting the work and starting the protocols, like remission. So don't have symptoms, blood work is optimal, and, no presence of thyroid antibodies. And even through a second pregnancy, I stayed in remission, which I know for a lot of us, like, pregnancy is a stressor on the body and we can get a flare up of our Hashimoto symptoms. But even through a second pregnancy, I stayed in remission. So I feel really grateful to listen to my gut, like walk the path, even 2 functional medicine doctors before.
Right. That's unheard. I don't know that I've ever met a functional medicine doctor who doesn't do complete thyroid panels. So that's unbelievable. But that's also, it doesn't matter, what the shingle says. There are great thorough doctors in all walks and some that aren't digging down as far as they need to. So but you continue to advocate for yourself and you didn't give up. Most people would be like, well, you saw all these doctors already, so why would you go see another one? And so good for you. And that's an important message too for everybody, is to just keep looking.
Yeah. To really be your own advocate.
I love
no
that.
one's going to take care of you except you. And no one has to live in your body except you. So if you don't feel good, keep hunting. Yeah.
And the other pet peeve is, and most of us have gone through it, at least those of us that have kids, that, that whole, oh, you're a new mom. Like, I wish no doctor would ever say that to anybody ever again. We know the difference between I'm tired and I'm fatigued to the center of my bones. It's completely different. And if you've experienced it, you can tell the difference right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
For sure.
let's dig into, I think everybody listening could be like, okay, you've got thyroid issues, you've got Hashimoto's, clearly that over exercising that you were doing, not the best approach. We can all relate to that. And I see it all the time. And I did it as well as my health started to decline. For me, it was more of a, like, I'm not giving up this thing. Like my RA had taken so much and I wasn't going to take the physical activity that I love. So I pushed and I pushed. But I want to get into I think most of us experience the opposite, right? We're not overdoing cardio. Or maybe we were, and then we go 180 and it's gentle and slow. And we're told gentle stretching, do some yoga. And full disclaimer, I love yoga. Like nobody's saying don't ever do yoga, but I want to talk about the resistance training.
Yeah.
You love yoga too. See,
I love yoga.
Nobody's hating on yoga. Yoga's great. Pilates is great. Like if you find these things that you enjoy and you love, I'm guessing you're not going to say totally give them up, but we want to get into why that's not what you need. And this idea of feeding muscle and resistance training. So let's dig into some of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just put it out there. I'm a yoga instructor. I taught yoga, for 14 years in New York City in the corporate setting in yoga studios.
Love it.
I too love yoga. Okay. Travel the world with yoga retreats, probably got some parasites on those. But so if you frame the autoimmune condition around muscle tissue being the largest endocrine organ in the body. What does that mean? It means that when you contract muscle, newer research out shows that you secrete proteins, myokines, cytokines, and those things that you secrete can reduce inflammation, can affect your hormone profile, can affect your metabolism. So it's kind of cool to think I can directly affect like the uptake of glucose into the muscle. I can directly affect the inflammatory load in the body by contracting my muscle. So while yoga, Pilates, low impact exercise, stretching is nice in theory with like not overdoing, it from an adrenal perspective,
right?
You're not going to feed the muscle tissue in the way that you need, which is under load. And so to get that stimulus, you need to pick up a heavy weight with amazing form and put it down and do it again. You need to hit this fatigue of, if it was on a scale of 0 to 10, you need to kind of hit an 8. So by the last rep, you're thinking like if 10 is like, no way I can pick up this weight. And 8 is maybe I have 2 more reps in the tank. So you have to hit that exertional point to get that muscle stimulation. You could probably do, 20 chaturangas.
I was totally what I was just thinking. She's going to say chaturanga. I know it.
Or you could do, 5 floor presses with, or, you could get that in a different way. And in terms of having an autoimmune condition, specifically a condition that has an underactive thyroid component like Hashimoto's, where there's slower tendon turnover, I would rather choose something that has a lower rep. Whereas if I did 20 chaturangas, I might predispose myself to a tendon injury or an overuse injury. Because with that hypothyroid component, all our tissue is regenerating and replenishing throughout the day. When we have an underactive thyroid, every metabolic process in the body, including our muscle tissue and our tendons, needs thyroid hormone. When we have a low thyroid, low functioning thyroid, it just takes longer for that regeneration to happen. So, a lot of women will complain like, oh, my shoulders, like my bicep, they won't say bicep tendon, but they'll point to the front of their shoulder, or the knees, right? That infrapatellar tendon, right? Where the kneecap goes down to the lower leg. They'll be like, oh, I don't want to get on the floor because I'm afraid I won't be able to get back up because my knees ache. Well, that's that tendon aching. So it's important to create that strength and stability, feed the muscle, so that those tendons can be strong.
I love that. And I'm a visual learner. And so I'm like listening and I'm like, what? Just the way you said that makes so much sense. And I've never heard anybody just put it out there simply for us with, of course, if you think of all these processes are slower with suppressed thyroid, with Hashi's, even if it's not autoimmune, and those with autoimmune, obviously we're extra special, but that visual of like, oh my gosh, of course your tissue is going to regenerate slower. And I don't want to do 20 chaturangas. And why should we? There's this fine line again between, yes, we need to stress the muscle to strength, but we don't need to stress the body to strengthen. And I love that differentiation.
Yeah. I mean, it's even specifically the tendons get stronger under load. There's no amount of stretching, massaging, rubbing, stimulating in that sense that's passive that can strengthen a tendon. The only way a tendon strengthens is when you put it on load. And I think, another interesting kind of injury that women experience with Hashimoto's, and often picked up in perimenopause, menopause, is frozen shoulder syndrome, where your arm's kind of glued to your side and you can't wash your hair or comb your hair, even put your arm into a jacket. And I think there's 2 research articles on it where they took people with known hypothyroidism and checked like, what is the prevalence of frozen shoulder syndrome? And, so there's a correlation, same thing, like low thyroid, the tissue is kind of like getting contracted, and now, you can't put your arm in your jacket. So, that's another thing that comes up often, menopause, female. So, anytime a patient comes to me and they have frozen shoulder, I'm like, oh, did you get a thyroid panel, full thyroid panel? And usually it's no. And then usually I ask them to go ask their doctor for one, because the rehab is so long and brutal. Like you could do, 1 to 2 years of rehab going 3 times a week.
Wow.
And then it might get better. And then a lot of women will experience that on the other side.
The other shoulder. Yeah.
Like, why is it the other side?
My mom went through that. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if you got that thyroid component addressed, like if there was something that needed to be managed with medication, whatever, the healing would probably be faster. Sometimes women they'll do manipulation under anesthesia where they put you under and then they basically like tear the tissue. And so, like if anyone could never have to go through that.
We're talking about prevention here, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, there's obviously, if somebody already is experiencing it, like you said, I love that you're sending them like, get a full thyroid panel, but this is preventative. Like we can all be strengthening and doing these things. And I love that you gave that example, because that is the one I think that most people would think like, well, they weren't stretching enough, so it got stuck,
there's a lot of like cultural blame, shame, like, whoa, what did I do? Like, well, maybe nothing,
Wow. That is amazing. So when you are working with people and they're coming to you with their stretching and or yoga routine, or maybe they're just walking, because that's where we tell people to start, is move, right? Just start moving. What does that look like? I know you said for you, it was 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week, but where do you have people start?
Yeah. I mean, I start them, I do a movement assessment. I'm always looking at what is not moving enough, which I think listeners can understand. And then on the flip side, you also look at, okay, what is moving too much? Like too much movement is also not a good thing. And so, and I don't mean movement as in like, you're not doing enough in your day. I mean, movement is like from a joint perspective, is there too much range of motion? So we start there. Usually we take a history of like, okay, where are they starting in their exercise journey? Like, are they mainly just doing yoga or Pilates or stretching or walking, which, walking is great from a cardiovascular perspective. And then we get them pretty quickly on a resistance training program, doing functional movements. We call them the essential 7. So it's a hinge, like a deadlift, a squat, a push, a pull, a carry, like you're carrying groceries, and then an anti-rotate. And, part of the assessment is I check a Baton score on everyone. And a Baton score is a physical therapy orthopedic test, looking at 9 points in the body to see if there's signs of hypermobility. And why am I doing this? Because from a clinical aspect, looking at the autoimmune population from a movement and strength perspective, I have noticed clinically that a lot of the autoimmune population has this element of tissue laxity, joint hypermobility, almost like the joints are kind of like loosey-goosey. And where it comes up and is really easy to see is in the knees, hyperextending, like the knees traveling back behind the ankles, the elbows. So for example, we go back to yoga. If you're always that person in yoga class in down dog or at the top of a plank, and the instructor kind of comes over, is like, put a little bend in your elbows, and you're like, oh, I thought our elbows were straight, but they're actually hyperextending. You can touch your thumb to the soft part of your forearm. And then if you could bend your pinky back beyond 90. And then the last point to check is if you had your feet together, knees straight, and you just bent forward, knees straight, you could palm the floor, which I know every yogi is probably
Wait a minute.
That's the goal.
Isn't that the goal?
Yeah, that's actually not normal. So
oh my gosh, you
much.
Just totally made my day.
I just broke every yogi's heart right there.
Awesome.
So those are those 9 points for a Baton score. And I notice a lot of women with an autoimmune condition have that element of like the knees are hyperextending, the elbows hyperextending, they can palm the floor, no big deal. And so they don't need things that create mobility. They need things that create strength and stability and joint integration. So we go to those functional moves that you would do in life, like a hinge, like carrying your groceries, being able to push something, being able to pull something, really basic moves. I think people, especially with this day and age of social media, it's like, okay, the sexy moves. It's like, you don't need the sexy move. Like the
we need real life.
The people who are experts in lifting, they do the basics consistently. That's the only difference, is they do the basics consistently. And so I work, if the person I'm working with is more sedentary, it's working up to 3 days a week, 20 minutes, sometimes it's only, starting out like 2 days, 15 minutes, whatever someone can do, and meeting them where they're at. Usually I have them get a weight that they could press or push. So that might be 8 kilo, 10 kilo. And then I usually start, especially in a deadlift, 2 12 kilo bells, which is 50 pounds, which I know some listeners are like 50 pounds, but you need enough resistance to turn on the muscles. If it's too light, you're just going to be, standing up, overextending your hips. You're not going to get any proprioceptive feedback to like give you feedback of where you are in time and space. So you need enough load to get things to turn on. And that's usually, I start with 50 pounds. So
that's way more than a soup can.
Yeah, that's way more than a soup can. I think there is a certain population of autoimmune women who like they can't get out of bed.
Their start. Right. Of course.
Yeah. And that could be their starting point. But I think,
or body weight, even just, right. But that's not.
But what if you did, so I'll counter that with like, what if you did instead of body weight? Because actually, like, for example, a body weight squat is actually much harder than if you just did it with a little load to offset.
Gotcha. Sure. Yeah.
What if you just did like 1 rep and then you parked it and you took a walk, like you took like a 2-minute like break, and then you did 2 reps. And I know that's not, for like professional lifters, that wouldn't be enough stimulus, but for the woman who's very sedentary and deconditioned, that might be the starting place. So,
and you answered, that was going to be my next question, because again, I'm going through like, okay, well, what's in my data bank of, 50 plus years on the planet. And, if you can only do a couple of reps, it's too heavy. And you're saying not necessarily. That's not.
Yeah. Cause 2 reps will very soon, it gives you the stimulus and the muscle memory. We'll just simply call it muscle memory, so that the next time you do it, it won't feel so foreign. You'll come back to it and you'll be like, okay, yeah, like this is the setup. This is where I breathe. This is how I sit my hips back. This is how I pick it up. So maybe you come back the next time and it's like 2 reps, take a minute break, 3 reps, take a 2-minute break. I think that the other key here is, oftentimes fitness, especially with the high intensity interval training, there's not a lot of rest. And when you look at people who are lifting heavier professional lifters, they do low reps, they do heavier weight, and then they take a 3 to 5 minute rest break. If you go to a fitness class, there's no rest break until the end of the 50 minutes. So I think part of it is like changing the mindset of what our workout is, quote unquote, supposed to look like. I think when I was younger, it was a good workout, quote unquote, is there's a puddle of sweat around me. Yeah. I'm red in the face. I'm huffing and puffing, and that's my good workout. And I think expecting that 6 days a week, 3 days a week is unrealistic. And now my workout is more to get me strong, to energize me. It's not to break me down.
I love that. And I can see, when we're addressing any kind of exercise with especially Hashimoto's, but any autoimmune, because much like in your story, there's typically some sort of an adrenal load issue going on. And it just makes total sense. Like, it's just so logical now that you said it, of like, oh, but the rest break in between
will give you time to recover.
We need that reset.
Yeah.
We need that recovery. And it doesn't have to be, we're recovering for the next 3 days because we were red in the face with a puddle of sweat and our body, it was just too much. So you mentioned, which of course makes also perfect, form is so important. You're working with people and you're guiding them and I'm guessing, correcting form as you go so that they can build that proper muscle memory. How, first of all, are you working just with people in person? Like where would somebody start and know that they're doing it right? Help us out.
Yeah. I mean, the majority of people I work with now are online. And I think from working with people so much in person, getting really good at cueing and getting people set up in the right, quote unquote, right position is really important. And, you can say, if you go back to like this yoga example, like you can tell someone like trying to get them into down dog, like, okay, so like sit your hips towards the sky, lift your butt towards the sky, like there's so many ways to say it and like what's going to click for someone, what's going to click for the majority. So after working with a lot of women, I'm like, okay, I know if I tell my women, step your feet like outer hip width, your toes, if there was a clock, are going to point to like 1 o'clock and 11 o'clock. You're going to put your hands right in like your bikini line hip crease, and you're going to sit your hips back and you're going to fold your belly to your tops of your thighs, like you're squishing your hands. And that's your hinge. Like 95% of the time it gets someone into the right position.
Right.
Yeah. Versus, you'll hear trainers be like, okay, so like they won't tell you where to exactly put your feet. And they'll be like, okay, so like just sit back.
Well, and even the outer,
squatty,
the specificity of outer hip width, because most of us, myself included, if I'm not consciously thinking about it, this is years of different classes, if somebody says hip width, I'm never actually hip width. I'm always in. We're all always tend to think our hips are
like a little more
narrower than they are. Maybe it's just because I've had 3 children. I don't know. But just that cueing, like outer, gets you to think like, okay, really, where are my feet? And I love that you said 1 and 11 because that's where my feet go anyway. Yeah. So I like that.
And there's cues. So when you're picking up a weight, it's important to know how to build tension, to like recruit your own strength and power. So for example, a lot of women, when they press a bell overhead or they're doing any push movements, they think mentally, this is an upper body movement. My upper body's weak. Well, when you press something overhead, it's actually, you're recruiting all the way from your feet, up your legs, you're squeezing your butt, you're breathing into your belly and you're bracing, and then the bell goes up. So it's actually a full body movement. And there's cues you can give, for example, foot dialing, or which can be cued different ways, like your feet are at that position, like outer hip width, 1 and 11, and you're squeezing your heels, but you don't move your feet.
Right.
Almost like you're screwing your feet into the floor. Like that will immediately, you'll feel your quads turn on, you'll feel your butt squeeze, you'll feel everything engage. And that is what is part of helping lift heavier. So like so all that power is in there. You just have to teach someone how to recruit that tension. So, I'll start with women and they'll be like, oh, like 50-pound deadlift. Like they're scared, right? Like weights are scary. Kettlebells, which people call them, but they're kettlebells, are scary at first. But if you teach someone really quickly how to build that tension, like 50 pounds goes up really easy, really fast. And they're like, okay, time for heavier weight, So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So I think that's the beauty of using weights. And I think it's also, it has carryover into a mental state. Not only is there
we all, especially everybody anyway. I mean, I have a daughter, everybody needs to feel strong, but especially those that have been knocked down with autoimmune or Hashi's, and that's empowering. And that's why I do this, is to help empower people. Why you do it, that's the key to creating wellness. So
absolutely.
Amazing. Last question. I don't want to keep you over time, but I'm like, I have this whole list of questions. And so I want to make sure, short of working with you, I guess I'm looking for like a what not to do, because I could see me listening to this conversation and like running out to my gym to sign up for a kettlebell class, right? Like, what would be, I guess, some mistakes listeners might make feeling really motivated, like, I'm going to build muscle, I'm going to do it. Like what should they not run out and do?
Yeah, I think when you're holding a weight, when you're under load, you probably shouldn't be under load, especially if you're first learning, more than 20 seconds. So like I've gone to workout classes and they're like, we're going to do kettlebell swings for 2 minutes. Like I've never done, like I do 10, which is about 20 seconds. And then I park the bell and I break. Okay. So that like long and, especially with more ballistic movements, like a kettlebell swing, like that's meant to be done in short doses, not for, 1 to 2 minute periods of time. I think the other thing that's really common, and was one of the things that I always have to retrain, is when someone says like, engage your core, tighten your abs, like what does that actually mean? And as women, especially those who've gone to Pilates, they think, I'm going to pull my belly button into my spine. I'm going to suck in. I'm going to skinny my waist. And you don't want to do that under load, because that will actually, it will decompress that intra-abdominal pressure and that natural core strength, and could actually, give you a disc herniation or back injury when you pick up a weight. So you want to learn how to breathe down and wide. And then on the exhale, you want to learn how to like keep that tension, that brace, like as if you had a little tank of strength in your core. And so, I think that's like one of the number one things I always have to retrain is like, when you pick up a weight, don't suck your belly in, which I get a lot of women that are like, wait, I'm not supposed to do that. So I think those would be the two biggest things. And I think the third thing is, we get power. So, oftentimes we are told to exhale on the exertional part. So like if you did a bicep curl, it's right on the bending of the elbow. So especially with kettlebells, especially when you're teaching someone to recruit their own tension, if you have someone do an audible exhale, they will be able to access that brace. Sometimes you see people, they like inhale and then they pull the weight and they're like, like they're blowing through a straw, right? Yeah. Like it's just, there's no like power to it. And you really want to access your own power. So when I have people do it, it's inhale, exhale, to like really that audible aspect really helps you find your brace in your core. So I think one of the other, which, some women in a workout class might be like, okay, I'm going to look like that person who's really breathing really loud. Yes, be that person, because it will make you stronger and it will help you protect your back so you don't injure yourself.
I love that. That's amazing advice and things to look for. So how can, and I do think it's so important, to have those ideas of this may not be the class for me, if they're doing a 5-minute, arms, whatever it is, like you just heed this advice because it is worth lots of gold. Tell me a little more about how listeners can work with you or tap into your knowledge and expertise.
Yeah. So I have a program called Thyroid Strong. There's 2 versions, intermediate, 6 weeks for people who have picked up a weight before, but maybe haven't done it in a while. And then there's a 12-week program for people who've never picked up a weight, for those people who are deconditioned or just more, more sedentary. And so that's called Thyroid Strong. And it's super fun because if you think about how many times have you done a group program or a challenge and people are getting results, like a lot of women come in doing like Beachbody and they're just like, I'm not getting the results like everyone else. It's like, okay, well, your body's a little different. You have an autoimmune condition. Like everyone in Thyroid Strong has Hashimoto's. And, we experience similar things like squats and lunges, really hard. Like they're just hard, going back to that tendon aspect.
Right.
And so you have to modify and people have questions. And so it's nice that like everyone's on the same page and speaking the same language. And it's just a really great community of women. And that can be found at dremilykiberd.com. And it's Dr. Emily Kiberd across all the social platforms, including TikTok.
Again. Check her out on TikTok
and Instagram. Yeah.
I love that you just answer all my questions before I ask them. And all the links are going to be included in the show notes, but I do always ask because I like to listen on the go. And so now people know where to find you. What is one step that listeners can take starting today, to start to improve their health? It could be anything.
Anything.
Anything. I know.
I would prioritize protein intake, minimum 30 grams per meal to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which is basically muscle tissue, grow your muscle tissue, because how you eat can affect your muscle tissue. And that's a beautiful thing. So start your day with protein, try and hit 30 grams minimum.
I love that. And that was one of the things I wanted to get into and talk about. How do we, feed ourselves to build muscle, and protein intake is so important. So I love that you went there, and we could talk about that for 10 more minutes, but I promised I wouldn't keep you too long this morning. So I am so, so grateful for the just amazing knowledge and tips that you've shared with listeners. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
For everyone listening, remember you can get the show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.